So I've been wanting to go back and revisit games that I'd previously looked at while they were in early access and see how they have actually performed now that they have been released. And one of the first games on that list is Subnautica, the early access survival game that had actually spent quite a long time in the system and has only fairly recently been officially released. Now, survival is kind of an interesting genre for me because I actually don't personally enjoy a large amount of the survival games that have showed up on Steam in droves, actually. But that's because I find quite a lot of them to be kind of samey-ish, and I kind of just sort of got a bit, I guess, put off by the whole thing. But there are a few that really did things very, very differently, and fittingly enough, I found a lot of those to be pretty interesting. Games like Don't Starve, for instance, with its really awesome art style and very different way of just doing things in general. And another one of those games that popped up that caught my attention pretty much immediately as soon as it entered early access was Subnautica. Mostly because of its just general underwater theme and a couple of other differences that made it really, I suppose, eye-catching to me. And it turned out to be really, really good when I first tried it. It had a lot of promise, but it was very buggy. And it also didn't run all that well, at least not for me personally. But it showed a lot of promise, so I waited a little while before covering it. I just, waited for it to be in early access for a bit and just sort of waited for it to cook. And then covered it a little bit later in its lifespan. Now, though, it's actually officially released, I wanted to see it again, get it a little bit farther into its progression and stuff, and see some of the new things that they've added since then, and just show it off a lot better. So I did, and here it is. This is Subnautica in its actually officially released form, and I can say, personally, that now I actually find it to be really, really good, and a really good candidate for release, because a lot of the problems that I had with it have been solved. Now, what are the things that it does differently that actually attracted me to it? Well, for one, it's underwater, as you can probably tell. That's really cool, because, the whole idea that you've crash-landed on an alien planet that happens to be an ocean planet is not something that a lot of games do. In fact, I don't really know pretty much any other game recently that's done anything like that. That's really neat. And also horrifying to me, because I have a generally crippling fear of water. And this game does a lot to bring that out, especially water that is very, very deep and that you can't see very far in. And yeah, this game has a lot of that. So if you have a similar fear, then playing this game is, I guess, a bit of a rush and also terrifying. I can't play this game in very long stints of time because it threatens to give me a bit of a heart attack, but it is really, really good at that, and I suppose that does say a lot about its atmosphere and how good it is at actually replicating various interesting biomes and things, and we're actually going to go into one right here that I'd never been in before. One of the newer additions that I hadn't really gotten to experience before going into the fully released version is the thing that I'm in right now. This is the Sea Moth, because now there are vehicles in the game. The official release version does have vehicles. A couple of them, in fact. You have, of course, something I had known about before, the Sea Glide, which isn't exactly a vehicle, it's that thing that you hold on to that propels you forward. But this is the Sea Moth, which is a sort of mini submersible dealie that is just a one-person submersible vehicle. It's kind of adorable, but very, very useful, and can be upgraded in a couple of different capacities. It's actually very cozy in here. And it has some lights as well. I don't know what the hell happened there. That guy just decided he didn't want to be here anymore, I guess. And it still has some glitches here and there, but it is a significantly less buggy experience than it has ever been, that's for sure. Nothing game-breaking that I've encountered so far. And as you can see, it also has a bit of a method of self-defense. The fish taser, trademark, as I like to call it. It's actually a sort of electrical impulse that allows you to defend yourself from creatures that get a little too close, although I imagine it doesn't work against everything. Like, for instance, there's a big electrical... I'm not even sure what they are. The big electrical snaky bits that like to writhe around this particular area that terrify me. They are aggressive if you get too close, although I was fairly lucky in this footage and that I didn't get too close to them in order to have them attack me. I imagine since they're basically made of lightning, that shocking them wouldn't do anything. So maybe do something else, like run. But yeah, I did actually get fairly lucky in not getting too close. But it does work on other things. And this place is just really cool. I think it's called the Kooshball Zone, because, I mean, look at it. But yeah, it's just very atmospheric, especially at night, because these things do glow. And you also have those volcanic vents down there that give you a lot of sort of ambient light and sound, and a bit of a suntan, I presume, if you get too close. And there's a fair bit of other ambience around here, just because of the sound, although of course those things make horrifying sounds, but just the ambient sound I'm talking about, of like the vents and the faraway fish and things like that. And really they've done a great job of actually fleshing out the other biomes and adding new biomes in the path to the release version in order to make everything seem a bit more, I suppose, varied, which you would hope for in an underwater planet. You know, the diversity of life and, well, flora and fauna and everything would be quite high, you would hope, because that's the way the undersea kind of environment tends to work. But yeah, just being down here tends to be quite varied and interesting, so there's a lot to see. And no pun intended. And everywhere you go, you will end up in different biomes with completely different rules, different bits of life, and different things to find and harvest, and different blueprints to find. The exploration in the game is probably one of its best points, if not its best point, because of how varied the undersea areas tend to be, and how much different things you can find, how many different things you can find. Grammar. And in fact, down here, I actually found a bit of wreckage with some stuff to see inside. It's a bit difficult to find, and you can see how different the place tends to look when it starts to get dark and nighttime. Very creepy, if you're me, and scared of everything in this game, but quite interesting looking nonetheless, but still kind of cozy in here, even though I'm being attacked. However, as you can see, I did find this bit of wreckage. Laying on a shelf next to one of those volcanic vents, I parked as close as I could to the entrance here, and tried to just explore it to see what was in there. Maybe some blueprints or upgrades or something, because I do have to go back fairly frequently to the sea moth to get some oxygen, because I'm very far down, and I don't have a rebreather on to make myself be able to stay under the water a bit longer, because I'm fairly close to the Aurora, which is the crash ship that led you here, which means there's radiation in the water, and I have to wear the full radiation protection suit, or else I will die. So I can't wear the rebreather with that. Now, I think one of the other things that's interesting that this game does differently than a lot of survival games that's pretty important to talk about is the map itself. I mentioned all the biomes and the diversity of life and things. The map is not randomly generated in this game. It is the same every time, which I think is a fairly interesting move, because a lot of survival games go the random generation route, where the biomes and different bits of the landmarks and important places to go and things will all be sort of placed in random locations every time you generate a new game. And this game did not go that route. They decided to do it differently. And I think that's an important distinction because of how many games don't do that. And I think that's actually a very positive change for this game, because of how dangerous the different areas are, and how different they are, and how the progression of getting new materials, and how the new materials are located in very specific areas of new biomes actually works. That's actually kind of a big deal. And I think it's actually very important that they make the new biomes, I suppose, easier to find, like you know which direction to go to get to each one every time, or else the progression would be a bit more frustrating, because you would just have to explore in a random direction and hope you didn't run into a leviathan or something. So it's kind of important that you know where everything is every time. I think that's a positive choice, and in combination with the fact that the map is not randomly generated, also the map didn't go for just be as large and spread out as possible. The map is actually not that large. You don't really notice it because of how densely packed everything is, and how much well, first of all, how aggressive the sea life is and how much content there is on the map, but it's also not like spread out. It's not gigantic and sparse, which I think is another positive change from a lot of other survival games where it's mostly a wasteland with sort of landmarks spread out and very large distances that you have to sort of just walk to get to for quite a long time and then just find your way to the next one. And everything in between those landmarks is either nothing or very sparsely dotted with resources here and there. That's not how this game works at all, which does make sense because it's under the sea and sparse resources wouldn't necessarily make sense with all the diversity and life on the sea floor. There are a couple of biomes that are fairly dead, but that's because that's the point of them. They're meant to be sort of dead zones, where just about everything else is quite the opposite and full of life of different sorts for you to harvest for various resources, depending on what it is. Even dead-looking zones may have interesting resources, like, say, the blood oil in the depths zone, which looks dead and horrifying and kind of is, but the blood oil can be used for making some acids and other important resources. Now that up there, that is a Leviathan. I just thought I would show you so you can see what they are. That is a Reaper Leviathan, also called a orange-finned large snaky nope, and you don't want to get too close to it. I decided not to show you any closer because I like my sea moth being unexploded, but if you want to get closer to it, you can, and technically in some places you have to, especially if you want to scan it, but I don't want to right now because, like I said, I'm terrified of everything in this game, and look at it. Just look at it. Leviathans are sort of the large enemy barriers of the game. You're not really meant to kill them, although you technically can, especially if you have torpedoes. This thing, as well as a couple of other vehicles, can be fitted with torpedoes of various kinds for combat. And those are your best bet against those. That is not the best idea right now because I don't have anything even close to that sort of level of power to fight that. I have a knife. That's not going to do much. So I decided to leave. Those are the probably not as threatening Leviathans. There are others. Those, you may notice, have like a sort of terrifying wailing noise that they make, even far away, so they sort of let you know that they're close by. There are other Leviathans, like, say, the ghost Leviathans, that I absolutely despise because they're horrifying and they shouldn't exist. I do, you know, I like that they're in the game, I am joking, but I don't like them, they're horrifying. And they are significantly more quiet from far away, so they can sort of sneak up on you, in a sense, and they are much scarier and larger and stronger than those guys. To show you a bit of other diversity of the biomes in the game, I'm going to show you one of the underground areas really quick as well. Because that's something else that has been added since I last played. There aren't just undersea areas, there are also cave areas and some other spots like that. And these are also important for other reasons that I'll probably show you a bit, I will show you a bit later. So these cave areas go a lot deeper because, of course, the sea floor is only so far down. Caves, however, go even under that. And this is how you will get very, very far once you get the equipment to do so. I, of course, in the sea moth, as you can see, can only go 300 meters down, so I am limited as to how far I can go right now. However, in a bit, I will show you the Cyclops once I actually make it, which is a submarine that can go even farther than that. Now, this place is beautiful, although it does have these crab snakes in it which need to go away. They make sort of terrible noises, and they like to ambush you. They hide in those things, those big mushrooms. They're called jelly shrooms, for obvious reasons, and will attack you. But a bit of the good old fish taser will teach them to go away. But this place is very pretty, the jelly shroom caves, and has various bits of wreckage and ruin that you can salvage for blueprints and upgrades and things if you can survive down here long enough to find all of it. And it is also one of the best places to find a resource called magnetite, which you will need for some advanced fabrication of upgrades and some other things like, like that. But of course you do have to, live long enough down here. And as I mentioned before, this is a place that you will need to go in order to reach these sorts of depths to find some other important things later on. Now, I should also mention that in the release of this game, there is also a story, which is something that a lot of survival games do not have, or at least maybe only have a very threadbare one that is just sort of an excuse for you to be wherever you are and be surviving. But in this case, this game actually has a fairly interesting story. It is something that you're not necessarily aware of when you first start the game, because it's not exactly important. It's just you're here, you shouldn't have actually been here, and you need to not die, and that's really all there is to it. That's glass, doofus. But you soon discover that there is significantly more to it than that, sort of by accident, which is kind of a neat way to do the story, in my opinion. It's not, because, it's not meant to be something that you prioritize, you just want to get off the planet, but it sort of forces its way into the forefront because of what actually happens when you do try to get off the planet the first time. I'm deliberately being sort of vague because I don't want to spoil it, because it is genuinely interesting. But I will say that is a bit of a spoiler, just a little bit of a spoiler, not too much. There are some alien ruins here for you to actually go through. And I won't spoil too much about them, but I will show you the first one that you will come across. Because it's the first one, so I figured it's not too much of a spoiler since you will be finding it fairly early on in the game. And they have some really interesting looking architecture to them. And it's just kind of cool in general that there happen to be some alien structures here, because that's not the kind of thing that you're expecting at first. It just seems to be, it's an alien planet, yes, but it's very natural. It just seems that there is indigenous sea life here, not actual intelligent life, besides some of the more insidious things that are trying to kill you, but, nothing too humanoid or nothing capable of being sapient, per se. However, you do eventually discover what you're about to see here, which is an actual working structure. And the structure has a laser cannon on it that you have to deactivate. It looks something like this. That's a moon. So this is an almost Borg-looking structure at night, and as you can see, the actual, I suppose, building method is very, very interesting looking. It is somewhat reminiscent of Borg, aesthetic, because it's very, very geometric, very green, and a bit greebly. It looks pretty cool. There's also these weird serpentine piping, I assume, or energy conduit things that come off of various bits of it that look pretty sweet. They tend to be underwater. And this is just the first of the structures that you find. There's also some other artifacts stored here, like a rifle and some other things like that. You cannot have the rifle. It is behind some sort of force field that you cannot disable, unfortunately. But it is here. And you also do find some artifacts that you can keep, like some cubes that are energy sources, and some other things that allow you to craft some copies of the alien technology to use elsewhere, but I won't say anything else about that. And you will eventually discover that effectively you're stuck here for a time, and there's something going on this planet that the aliens, whatever they were, that built these structures were aware of. And you're going to have to find more of their structures if you actually want to eventually get off of this planet. And that leads on to the story itself, which is another interesting thing that this game does differently, and is part of the release version, that you can actually sort of win. There is a win condition, which is unusual for a survival game, because most survival games don't have that. Usually the whole concept is just that you survive as long as you can, and that's it. But in this case, you can actually complete the game, as it were. Most of the time, you, in a survival game, just survive as long as possible until you sort of get tired of it. But in this case, you can technically do that if you want and just not actually complete the win condition. But in this case, the win condition is to get off the planet somehow. And you can actually do that and complete the game, which is pretty neat, actually, for them to give you a story with a conclusion. So that's cool. But you do have to find, in order to get to that point, more of these. Some of them are very far down in the depths of the planet. We're talking like 800 meters plus below, so good luck with that. You do need some special equipment, of course, to get that far. But you can do it. There's one of the artifacts you can't take, by the way. A doomsday device, so maybe don't poke it. And you can find some pretty interesting things. This is one of the more, I suppose it's, since it is the first one you find, it's a bit of an introductory location. Nothing too much going on here. It's just supposed to be a bit of a dead location meant to introduce you to the fact that there are, in fact, facilities like these on this planet. Some of the others are, we'll say, less quiet. Now, I did say that I was going to show you the Cyclops, so here it is. The Cyclops is a bit different from the other vehicle that I was showing you earlier, the Seamoth, in that it is an enormous submarine that is technically meant to be piloted by multiple people. However, it doesn't have to be, because you are, of course, a single person. And here it is. As you can see, it is huge and very, very cool looking. And I think this is a good example of the kind of direction that the game takes later on, which is why I wanted to show it to you. Sploosh. So, this shows the kind of advancement towards sort of mid and eventually end game level stuff that you're going to be expecting now that the game is at its release. This is really, really cool. It's sort of like a home away from home, and it's really quite cozy on the inside and shows some pretty cool stuff. It's got like everything you need. You got some storage lockers over here to store some stuff on some long journeys. If you have like some various resources that you want to take home, or maybe to keep some extra suits and food and water in there. You got that big room up there because this thing can actually fit the Seamoth in it because it's so huge, so you can deploy the Seamoth from it if you want. You got the engine room with the ability to fabricate some upgrades. You got some power cells, which you do have to recharge, yes, or replace. You can launch decoys when there's a giant ghost leviathan chasing you, trying to eat you. And you can, of course, mess with the vehicle that's docked in here. Also the prawn suit, which is basically a mech that you can get later on, which I do not have yet because I'm not cool enough. And here's your sort of control center for the actual thing itself, which acts in a pretty cool way. Because when you're in here, you can basically almost like AR control the whole thing. And the way this thing is actually controlled is very interesting. You sort of use a combination of your mouse to look around and tap buttons like a HUD, like you would if you were just using your hand, and the keyboard to control the entire craft itself. And you would think it would feel kind of unwieldy because it's so large, but it actually doesn't. It feels pretty neat. And this thing is just really fun to pilot around, and I imagine once you actually take it to some very depthy, dark, and creepy areas, with all of its lights and cameras and stuff around the sides, it's going to be really interesting to pilot. The whole thing actually kind of gives me some first-person FTL vibes. And you can even change some colors of it. And yes, you can have engine room fires and things like that, so that fire extinguisher there is going to be very important. So you just gotta, start up the engines. And there you go. And as you can see, it can go down to 500 meters in depth by default, and yes, you can upgrade that to actually enhance how far it can dive, but that's just its default. It even has a couple of different speeds, which of course consume more energy and enhance the chance of it, bursting into flames. And you can also run it silent if you're afraid of the area that you're in attracting some very nasty things, but running silent, I believe, enhances the energy draw of it as well. So overall, it's just a really, really cool kind of just giant submarine that has some really neat features that give you just a really cool sense of exploration, which is really what this game is all about, I think. And that's kind of why I wanted to show this off at the end, to say that basically the release version of the game has a really awesome sense of exploration, and that's basically what the game is all about. If you are into this sort of thing, then you can check down below for the link to the Steam page, and you can grab this game for $25, which for the amount of content on offer is more than fair, in my opinion, for a really interestingly created survival game that breaks a lot of the genre molds. And it has these really cool cameras on the side, so you can watch horrifying ghost leviathans eat you from every direction, which is a really, really interesting feature. All submarines should have that. But yeah, it's a really good game, actually, and it's developed into something very much worthy of attention, and also it runs way better than it used to, and I think is still getting updates, actually, to this day. So yeah, there you go. That is Subnautica, available right now for $25 on Steam, and thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below, and enjoy the Cyclops. It's a beautiful creature. I'll see you guys next time.